the unions. Some scepticism from the ASTI and the TUI about these changes. They're not exactly leaping on board. Are they right that, I suppose the thrust of what they're saying is that teachers marking their own students is fraught with difficulty?
Well, I think it's important to say, and I want to acknowledge this from the beginning, that change is never easy. I know that, and it will certainly, it brings challenges, but it also brings opportunities. And in terms of what's being proposed here, Shane is quite correct. This is perhaps the most student-centred reform that we've had in generations nearly. I think it's very much so an evidence-based planned reform. And we know, and you've referenced it yourself, that it is not acceptable that 100% of the exam is on one given day in June. One of the key motivations here that I have in bringing in senior cycle reform is to empower students to meet the challenges of the 21st century, to enrich their learning, but also their skill base, and finally to embed wellbeing and reduce stress. So just in terms of the role played by the teacher, and I've heard the points that you've made earlier, international best practice, and I have engaged significantly from an international perspective in terms of best practice. So I've met with the OECD, Dr. Andrea Schleicher, Dr. Beatrice Pont. I have engaged with Andy Hargraves, an expert from the University of Ottawa, with Bill Maxwell of Scotland, Queen's University.
So lots of consultation.
And the evidence worldwide is telling us, for example, in the baccalaureate in France, 40% is teacher assessment, 50% in New Zealand. Almost all of it in Norway is teacher assessment, for the simple reason that teachers can see the continuum of learning of their students. And it's important that students have that opportunity to showcase over time. That's number one. But equally so, there's an incredible emphasis as it stands currently on the acquiring of knowledge, not necessarily sufficient on the application of knowledge. So allowing teachers to assess a student who, for example, as it stands currently in science, they might well be asked in the first few questions to describe how they would put together an experiment. Doesn't mean to say that they can go into the lab and actually apply that knowledge and perform.
So they could learn it all, is what you're saying.
What we're doing is we're saying different students have different skill sets.